Welcome back to Universal Corday. My name is Corday. Today's video is going to be me reacting to a video by Chris Broad, who is someone who lives in Japan. So somebody who also lived in Japan. I lived there for 6 months a number of years ago. I've also traveled there another 2 times. He's going to be talking about things to not do in Japan. So I want to see what he says and how it aligns with my experiences of Japan. So let's go.
So walking down the street whilst eating and drinking isn't illegal. You're not going to get shouted at and you're not going to get arrested by Ace Detective Sherlock Bones. But what you will get is the stare of disapproval. A lot of people don't know this one until you get here and never see anyone doing it. What you'll find is if someone wants to eat or drink something quickly outside, they'll buy at the convenience store and then eat it or drink it out the front. Same with vending machines. If they buy something from the vending machine, they'll drink it there and then next to the vending machine. The main reason is people are very conscious about keeping the streets clean here, and you don't want to ruin someone else's day by having them walk through your spilt coffee. That said, all you need to do to avoid the stare of disapproval is just stop and eat and drink whatever it is there and then. Maybe it's on a bench, maybe you're just standing at the side of the road, whatever. Just don't walk whilst eating and drinking and you'll be alright.
Alright, that one is very true. It's very, very true. People will look at you, only a few people, because you are a foreigner. They try not to stare, depending on where you are. If you're in Tokyo, most likely they won't stare that much. If you're outside of Tokyo, maybe some countryside areas, they may stare a bit more. But he's very right. Eating and walking, drinking and walking is not something that's generally done in Japan. So people usually stop somewhere on a bench and then they'll eat. So yeah, he's right about that one. I agree with that. That's a tick. Well done, Chris.
Three things to point out here. Number one, never put your chopsticks upright into the rice, as this is part of a ritual conducted at funerals when offering rice to the spirits of the deceased. Similarly, number two, never pass things from chopstick to chopstick, because again, this is done during funerals to pass the bones of cremated relatives. So that kind of imagery doesn't go down well over dinner, as you'd expect. Probably best not to conjure up imagery surrounding death before you've even had your lunch. Oh, and thirdly, don't do the rubbing of the chopsticks. You know when you open wooden chopsticks, you like to do that to get rid of the splinters, and just because it's fun. Everyone loves doing that, right? But don't do it in Japan because it's seen as rude to the owner, because you're basically saying, oh, your chopsticks are probably cheap, which, let's face it, they probably are. But in fact, they usually definitely are.
That one's also correct. He's right. You don't do any of those things that he mentioned. I'm not sure why people would rub the chopsticks against each other. That seems a very weird thing to do.
Stop it. Get some help. Never
thought I wanted to do that. Never had the issue with chopsticks that I want to rub them against each other. Each to their own, I guess. I think he's going to say no tipping. Yeah, Japan is a no tipping society.
Nice.
Which is fantastic.
Yeah, boy.
Not looking at any particular countries that like to force people to tip and look down on you if you tip. Japan is a no tipping country, which seems sensible.
Probably the greatest thing about Japan ever, and the reason that I eat out several times a week, just because I save 20% automatically. In Japan, it's believed that customer service should always be exceptional, with staff giving 120% every time. 120%? 110%, 120% would be ridiculous. But it's not necessarily rude to tip someone, it just creates this awkward situation where the worker, the staff, would feel like you're assessing their performance and they could potentially lose face. So you might think you're being nice by giving someone a tip, but you're not. You're just creating an uncomfortable situation for the worker, and they'll probably just reject your tip outright. So don't be tempted to do it. There's a real emphasis on being mindful when you're using public transport in Japan that's often completely absent in many countries. Numerous of the times that I've been riding a train in the UK and someone nearby has been screaming at their partner down the phone, and I felt like I was part of the argument, like some kind of unpleasant 4D experience. But given Japan's density, it's especially important to be mindful when you're stuffed in a train alongside fellow commuters, many of whom are sleeping as well. With that in mind, don't ever talk on your phone on the train. That's a massive, no thing to do here. And even talking loudly is looked down upon. If you're on a local train or a subway train and you get a phone call, just ignore it until you get off. And if you're on a bullet train, you can go to the little compartment in between the carriages and take your call there. I remember for the first few years that I lived here, whenever someone handed me a business card, I was utterly terrified because until then, business cards to me had always just been a bit of paper or a bit of card with some writing on. But in Japan, they are so much more. Once you've exchanged business cards, the trick is to imagine you've just been handed the lost treasure of El Salvador or something. First, study it meticulously, the name, the job position, the details, and then either put it in your business card holder or just put it on the desk if you're at a business meeting. Just put it on the table. Never play around with business cards or put them in your back pocket because they're seen as a physical extension of the person themselves, and you don't want to stuff somebody's physical extension down your back pocket. If you're doing business in Japan, always carry business cards. You don't want to be that awkward foreigner who stood there writing out their name and number 50 times in 1 hour on the back of a tissue. And for the record, I am usually that awkward foreigner scribbling down my details because I do forget to bring them, and subsequently I hate myself when it happens.
Right, so he's right about those last two as well. Talking on the train, generally not something that people do. People do text a lot on the train. You'll see them absolutely engrossed on their phones, not paying attention to anything else, but they don't talk out loud on their phones. And then the business card one, I got lots of business cards when I was in Japan. I would just ask people for them, and they love giving you their business cards. I don't know if it's still a thing now. This was a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, when I was getting those business cards. I didn't do anything with them aside from what he said, study them, and then you continue on with life.
If you've got a runny nose, standard procedure here is just to keep sniffing, or just to find a toilet or a broom cupboard to hide in. Blowing noses in public is pretty rude. Interestingly though, handkerchiefs are pretty popular here. Not in the way you would think though. People use them to wipe sweat off in the hot summer weather, or even more commonly to dry their hands in public toilets. Because surprisingly, many public toilets in Japan don't have any hand drying facilities, despite having space-age toilets that reside in the same rooms. It's quite a weird contrast that I don't quite understand. Physical contact in Japan isn't really a thing. You'll bow a lot, you'll nod enthusiastically daily, but occasionally you might shake hands with someone if they're a good friend or a business client that you get on well with, but generally I avoid it unless someone makes the first move. And hugging in particular doesn't go down well. It's just met with expressions of awkwardness and despair. And also amongst couples, public displays of affection are phenomenally rare here, so don't be surprised if you get the stare of disapproval if you're kissing your partner frantically in the street.
So that look on the actor's face from the hug was not because of a hug. I think he just done some kind of military move with a sword where he was mercy unaliving somebody at their request in the film The Last Samurai. It's a very funny way he used it in that way, as you don't get physical with Japanese people. I hug my Japanese friends.
Oh, bring it in. Starting from the bottom, now we're here. Yeah.
Obviously I don't do it with strangers, but I do hug my Japanese friends, shake their hands, whatever. So yeah, it's fine. It's just one of those things. It depends on the person really. But bowing, head nodding, those things go first of all, and then maybe if you build up rapport with someone, you can get to the point where you're hugging them.
And I think that it should definitely be this. If you're the sort of person who feels the need to have a debate or an argument about things or throw your opinions out there constantly, people will find you obnoxious and dislikable and probably just avoid you. Embedded heavily within the culture is this idea of keeping harmony and avoiding conflict at all costs. And it's a lot easier to do that when people aren't at each other's throats, throwing around opinions. Sometimes it can be frustrating when people are just unwilling to speak their minds or give you a clear yes or no answer. I mean, one time, one of my colleagues when I was teaching, I asked him, "Do you have any pets?" And he said to me, "Maybe my cat is dead." Maybe your cat is dead. What does that mean? It is dead or is it not dead? It's not Schrodinger's cat, is it? It turned out the cat was definitely dead, but he was just the sort of person that always liked to use the word maybe and just not express certainty. But if there's one reason I've never seen a fight anywhere in Japan in the last 5 years, it's probably this reason. That people are a lot more careful about expressing their opinions and holding back what they really think.
He is right about that. It does frustrate some Japanese people, especially Japanese people who may have spent time abroad and they've had a chance of experiencing how people do handle differences in opinions and thoughts, and then they have to go back to Japan where they have to, I wouldn't say conform, but learn how to create that harmony that is something that's strived for very much in Japan. What's the line they use? The nail that stands out is going to be hammered into place, which is something, a phrase that's used in Japanese. Yeah, it's very much about being a part of the community, and differing opinions can end up causing that person to not necessarily be accepted or to an extent ostracized in Japanese society. So it is something to be aware of. Obviously, as somebody from overseas, you get a bit more leeway, but if you want to really get along with people, you're going to have to learn how to, I won't say compromise, but if you really, really have something that you think is wrong, you're going to have to find a way to do it in as harmonious a way to express your opinion. Otherwise, yeah, they probably will smile at you and then completely stop engaging with you afterwards.
Yeah, I couldn't be bothered to film that one. Everyone seems to know this one already anyway. When visiting someone's house or entering a public building like a school or going to a hot spring, you take off your shoes and switch to slippers before you go in. The easiest way of knowing if you have to change your shoes is there'll be a change in elevation in the floor. So when you go in, there'll be a little stair, and that's when you know. This is the one thing on the list where failing to stick to the rules will have noticeable results. A few years ago, a friend and I visited a public bathhouse in Kyoto, and we went in, and you're supposed to take your shoes off. For some reason he didn't. I don't know why. I don't think he noticed or saw. There was a little old woman sitting behind the entrance counter where you kind of pay, and when we walked in, she saw that he still had his shoes on, and she shot up with terrifying energy and ran over and grabbed him and took him to the front and was like, "Get your shoes off, get your shoes off." And that image has stayed burnt into my mind. This quiet little old woman suddenly becoming so alive and animated by this terrible event. And ever since then, I've never forgotten to take my shoes off when entering a building.
He's right. So when I lived in Japan, I worked in a community centre for 6 months. And when you get to the entrance, they call it the genkan in Japanese. When you get to the entrance, that's where you have the slippers and the change of shoes. But then also, when you go to the toilets, there's the toilet slippers. And so the amount of times in one day I would change my shoes or move in and out of a different pair of shoes, I've never done it so many times in my life. I remember I would repeatedly forget and get told off. Not in a bad way, it's just be like, "Korede, please," in Japanese. Change your shoes, change your shoes. It was frustrating. By the end of it, I was so used to it when I got back to the UK. Now when people come to visit me in my place, they're not wearing their shoes in my place. They're taking off their shoes. And yes, I do have house slippers that they can get into. Some of them are very fresh. Nobody's ever used them before. Most of them are very fresh or brand new. So yeah, it's very much a thing in Japan about changing shoes when you go from one place to another. And it's very hygienic as well because you're not tracking the dirt from outside inside, so it makes sense. It's about protecting the spirit and the cleanliness of the place that you are entering and traveling through.
For whatever reason, rubbish bins and trash cans are disturbingly rare in Japan. Outside of convenience stores, it can be a nightmare to find one. And the reason I put this on the list is because so many people, so many of you guys message me on Twitter saying, "I'm in Tokyo and I can't find a bin, what should I do?" I've wandered through Tokyo for up to 20 minutes sometimes just in search of a bin and can't find one. The streets though, despite that, are shockingly clean here because people, if they can't find a bin, they just take the rubbish home with them. It can feel like some kind of mini game sometimes, going in search of a bin, because when you do find a bin you feel a real sense of achievement. But despite that, don't be tempted to litter, just keep trying and you'll find a bin one day. Seems like a fairly obvious addition to the list, and yet in the UK we just cross the street whenever the hell we want, whenever there's an opening in traffic, as opposed to waiting for the green light, same as many countries. In Japan, however, people do not cross the road on a red light. It's incredibly rare, and it's one of the greatest ways of seeing this sense of order and obedience to the law that exists in Japan. If you stand at a roadside in Japan and there's no cars coming, you can't see any cars whatsoever, people still will not cross the road until it goes green. Over the years, of the many friends I've had come to visit me here, this is the thing that shocks them the most. The idea of not crossing the street when there's no visible cars there. The idea of abiding by a rule that doesn't seem necessary. And yet for me personally, the main reason I abide by it is after a few years of being here, you don't want to stand out, you don't want to be this stereotypical rule-breaking foreigner. And as well as that, you don't want to run the risk of getting caught out by the police. So those are two things worth taking into consideration before you dash across the seemingly empty road. And the last
that is very true, as well as the one he mentioned before about the dustbins. So the dustbin one, I believe, is related to a sarin gas attack that took place in the 90s. I'll put information up about it. Because of that sarin gas attack, domestic terrorist attack that took place relating to, and I think they put the items into dustbins, which then ended up killing a number of people on trains. Dustbins have been reduced in terms of the number that, especially at public transport spaces, because of that, to reduce the chance of there being a domestic terrorist attack by somebody putting something in a dustbin and then just waiting until it's the opportune time to do the bad thing. With regards to crossing the road, I did a whole video with my friend about culture shocks and about the UK. And one of them is that the fact that people jaywalk here in the UK, if the light is red, they will still cross if there's no one there, whereas in Japan it's not done. I'll include a brief clip of it. You can also watch the full video of me interviewing my friend Hikari, where we talk about different aspects of the UK and Japan, but I'll put a clip here so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. 一番びっくりしたことはイギリスには
信号を守らない。私は今信号を守らないもん。
イギリス人になっちゃったね。
イギリス人になっちゃった。
And the last one, don't worry about not knowing anything about Japanese etiquette when you come to Japan. As I said earlier in this video, there aren't going to be any real consequences to not following any of these things, apart from maybe the footwear one. That's quite scary. You don't want to get dragged off by an old woman. The reason I say don't worry too much is because I find a lot of people come here and they're very nervous and very anxious about following the etiquette they don't really comprehend. And that includes even me. When I came here, I didn't know anything. And I was constantly anxious and nervous that I was making mistakes. But really, as a foreigner in Japan, you get kind of a free pass to make mistakes. People are understanding and they're kind and they will let you off. So don't become too nervous about following all the rules. Do your best, but don't become a nervous wreck. So those are my 12 things not to do in Japan, but what have I missed out? Let us know in the comments section below. I've probably missed out. Don't ever be late, and don't enter a bath or a hot spring without having a shower first. Those are probably the other two key ones that I've missed out. And now they're on the list. So this is actually 14 things not to do in Japan. So bonus stuff there. It's Christmas, so you get extra content.
There's a great video from abroad in Japan. He made a great video. I think he said pretty much things that I would say. I think he's right about everything. Lateness, punctuality is a very big thing in Japan. If you arrive on time, to an extent you're late. You should be there a couple of minutes early, maybe even. Be looked down on if you're meeting Japanese people in Japan and you're late, unless they're late themselves, which is very rare. Onsen, or the Japanese bathhouses, I think I went there twice. I'm not one for public nakedness with other people like that.
What do you mean by that?
So I didn't really do that, but people love it, each to their own. But yeah, it's a great video. I agree with everything he said. He didn't have many things that seemed weird. I will say that where he said that people will give you leeway, that's up to an extent. If you do things that are illegal, Logan Paul, if you do anything illegal, it will backfire on you. So obviously not doing illegal things are something you should avoid. Get some leeway in terms of some flexibility in terms of not knowing the etiquette. But videos like this help you to know some things in advance. Don't be too nervous about it. I think go there with a spirit of humility and wanting to learn and being understanding, but obviously always making sure that your safety is being maintained. So yeah, I think that's about it. I think it's a great video. I give this video a 9 out of 10. You made a really good video. I know this video was from years ago, but I know it still applies, and that's why it's got such a good view count, and you're doing so well on YouTube. So yeah, well done to Chris and Abroad in Japan, his channel. If you have any other videos you think you'd like me to react to as somebody who's traveled to Japan and 30+ other countries around the world, let me know. Put it in the comment section. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment and subscribe, and catch you in the next one. Peace.